Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick, and today in this very special episode, we are going to try and fix a ship. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen my prior video on the Badab War and the horrors that came out of Badab War Part 2 from Imperial Armor and how bad that book was for Battlefleet Gothic in general. But I've been requested by a number of people to make at least one of these ships playable, or at the very least balanced, in some regard that makes some moniker of sense in Battlefleet Gothic as a whole. And this has proven to be a bit of an ordeal because the Nicor, while Carcharodon's fans love this thing, doesn't actually have a lot of information about it. It's very vague. The book, the novel that it's in, doesn't give us a lot of information about the ship beyond the very strange aesthetic choices of the Carcharodons. And the actual description of the ship doesn't have a picture. It doesn't have any idea about what class of ship it is beyond a Charybdis class Grand Cruiser, which doesn't exist in the greater BFG lexicon, which ultimately means that Forge World was pulling something out of their ass. So we have to go look at the rules, look at some rules that other people have made, and then try desperately to fix it. Now, I have put in some baseline information into the spreadsheet that you see before you. You'll understand why when we get to it, but let's start with the original rules for the Nicor. Now, again, if you go back and watch my video on this, this is all going to be recapping, but the lore says it's good for hit and run attacks, planetary assaults, and fleet engagements. It's supposed to be swift and lethal, which doesn't mean that much for the Imperial Navy. Swift, when you're talking about a Grand Cruiser, is a kind of a dicey topic. Now, this thing on its base stat line has 10 hits as a Grand Cruiser. That's perfectly normal, standard across all Grand Cruisers for human design. 25 centimeter speed, however, is insanely fast for a Grand Cruiser. No Grand Cruiser in the game has base speed of 25. It has 45-degree turn, nothing fancy about that, but it has 5 shields. That's an astronomical number for a Grand Cruiser, especially since it has armor 6 up, which is insane. It is more heavily defended than a battle barge, and with 5 shields and 6 up armor, it is in fact more durable than a standard run-of-the-mill battle barge. It also has 3 turrets, the same as a battle barge. So already we have a stat line that, while it only has 10 hits, it's insanely more defensible than your run-of-the-mill battle barge. This is a big problem for the balancing of this ship. Now, going on to its firepower. Port and starboard, strength 7 weapons batteries at 45, very undergunned for a battle barge or a Grand Cruiser. Grand Cruisers of both Imperial and Chaos make have high concentrations of firepower in their port and starboard weaponry. This has cursory at best. Now, it has a prow launch bay with 2 squadrons of Thunderhawk, a strength 6 torpedo salvo, and a strength 10 plasma destructor. Now, the plasma destructor, as written here, is not on any facing of the ship. Now, it says in the descriptor that it's a prow weapon, and also weapon mounted in a lean ship prow and mass teleporter system. So, it's very poorly written. It's described the plasma destructor as being in the prow, but because it is not listed in the stats as a prow weapon, it can never be disabled. So what does the plasma destructor do? It is an inferior version of a bombardment cannon. So it's just a worse bombardment cannon. There's no reason to want a plasma destructor over a bombardment cannon. So we'll need to do something about that. And the teleporter assault simply means that you can re-roll your dice on boardings and hit and run attacks. Second value applies. Now, I'm going to want to make absolutely sure that this does not apply to the launch bay, namely the Thunderhawk, because when you say a ship does a hit and run attack, technically its Thunderhawk come from that ship. But I'm going to make, you can argue that that rule logic I would rather have it clarified in the rule. Now, I've talked about this. The ship is very poorly designed. There's really no reason to take it over a lot of other things beyond the fact that it can just sit on the board and never die. Now, if we move over to the other rules, which is the Additional Ships Compendium 2.0 version of the vessel, there have been a number of changes. One, it is significantly more expensive. This is not cheap enough for what you're getting even here. Now, the stat line is Grand Cruiser 10, no changes. The speed is slower. Turn at 45 degrees, 4 shields. Armor is still 6 up with 3 turrets. This is still better than a standard battle bar. Now, it's equipped. The weapon batteries have been boosted up to strength 8 left and right. Crowd launch bays are the same. They've replaced the torpedoes with a dorsal bombardment cannon at strength 6 that fire front, left, right, which can combine decently well with the port and starboard weapons batteries. And the keel plasma destructor, which is, if anything, worse than it was before. Now, onto the specific notes. It comes with Space Marines. A plasma destructor uses gunnery table as a weapons battery, but always hits on a 5+, which checks for critical hits. Plasma destructor always receives a +1 bonus. So it hits on a 5 and it crits on a 5. It is still an inferior bombardment cannon. I do not understand why they made these rules so bad. Now, the Red Wake, you have to purchase it, which is already part of the Nicor, but it makes the hit and run, you may re-roll the hit and run results for the ship and receive a +3 for boarding instead of +2. This is a problem because this makes the ship better than the Grey Knight Space Marines, and even the Carcharodons are not better than the Grey Knights. Sorry, Space Shark fans. This will have to probably be changed. Teleportation Bank, you make 2 hit and run attacks a turn and may re-roll the results. This is a little bit of a redundancy of statements from the prior rule. So as you can see here, we have a pair of ship rules that in one case is a weirdly over-balanced, rock that you place on the table that can effectively never die, but never really does anything anyway, because no one's dumb enough to get close. The other one is a very similar vessel with some funnier rules that's significantly more expensive, but really can't go around and do anything. The only benefit the old ship has is the fact that it's faster, which means you may be able to catch enemy ships into a boarding action, though the boarding is inferior in the original. So we have to talk about Grand Cruisers. The Imperium of Man has at its access two patterns of Grand Cruiser, which can vaguely be described as the repulsive pattern, which is based off the repulsive Grand Cruiser, and you have the Avenger. Yes, right. It's the Avenger pattern. So you have these two patterns. One is considered the Imperial version. One is considered the Chaos version. Now, it is described that the Charybdis class is seldom seen since the days of the Horus Heresy, but it is also described as being, was the exact wording, lean in the lean ship's prow, which describes either vessel. Well, you could make the argument that the Imperial style for the Avenger is lean because it's very narrow on the underside. They have an image here on the ASC rules that's basically a combination of a Chaos Cruiser front, the Battle Barge battery, the Imperial Cruiser body, and a Chaos Cruiser series of bridge here. It's a Franken ship if I've ever seen one. But if we're talking about which Grand Cruiser type we're talking about, it matters a great deal. Because the Imperial design has a convention in its design, and the Chaos version has convention in its design. The Imperial version has typically very, 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 very strong port and starboard weapons batteries that are usually divided between the upper bays and the lower bays. You can see this on about every one of the different versions, with the exception of the battery boat, which is just a giant 30-centimeter strength L out both sides. But all of the other ones have these differential between the upper bays and the lower bays and what they do. And there's always nothing in the prow. Now, then you have the repulsive version, which is different. It has very, very strong prow weapon, not prow weapons. It has very strong port and starboard weapons, which are typically battery. It has a torpedo in the front. It has a dorsal weapon, and it has, but it generally has weaker shields unless you pay for them. So if we look at these two designs, it looks almost like that the first version was really meant to be a modification of a repulsive Grand Cruiser, but done very poorly, and the other one was kind of a attempt at making a version of the Imperial design, almost, because neither of them do it correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to recreate the Nicor, what they're trying to do with this. Because obviously the ship is meant to be honestly, it's hard to discern what it's meant to be. The original one was very clearly meant to be a forward assault craft designed to go towards the enemy as quickly as it can, or drop torpedoes, drop Thunderhawks, hit things with a plasma destructor, and not really pay a lot of attention to its port and starboard weapons batteries. The other version, the ASC version, kind of loses that. It becomes more of a broadsidey vessel with its dorsal bombardment cannons. So I have to find a middle ground here. Now I'm going to talk about some very important elements. I'm not actually going to talk about the weapons first, because the weapons are not, the standard weapons are not that important. I want to talk about the plasma destructor. Okay? So the plasma destructor is meant to be a powerful weapon. Now in the original and in the second version, you get a strength 10 weapon, but it's 15 centimeters. It is super short range for a weapon that uses the gunnery table, but hits on 5s and crits on 5s. That, to me, does not sound like a particularly destructive weapon, even at strength 10 within 15 centimeters. I'm going to get a lot of shots. But why not just use a bombardment cannon? Why not replace that strength 10 bombardment cannon with, I don't know, that strength 10 plasma destructor for something more effective, like a bombardment cannon? It's not useful in the way that it is. So I am going to, let me see if I can actually write here. Yeah, I can custom write. So let's plasma destructor. Now we have a couple of choices. We can make this a interesting weapon. We can make this a savage, brutal weapon. Now I'm not going to make this weapon any better than a bombardment cannon. The bombardment cannon is already one of the best weapons in the game. So let's talk about what plasma does. Plasma hurts armor. Plasma is hot. Plasma does a lot of things. In space, plasma charged weaponry in Battlefleet Gothic, and this is a common mistake that people make in 40K. Plasma charged weaponry makes the shots go further and more accurately. It doesn't necessarily mean they're more damaging. So instead of making a plasma destructor 15 centimeter weaker bombardment cannon, let's do it a little differently. We can keep the 5+ hit, 5+ crit. Let's make it longer range. Let's actually make it a viable weapon outside of the normal bombardment cannon ranges. Now we already have a standard for the ship of 45 centimeters. So, that's fine, whatever. So instead, let's something unique. Get a plasma destructor. How useful. Can I change this? I better be able to change this. 45 PM. Yes, I can change it. Okay. Name. Prow. That's right, we're making this a prow weapon. Okay, so hits on 5. Uses the weapons battery table, and unlike heavy guns, it 100% can and will uh, have negatives, but it's meant to be powerful and destructive. So let's go with strength 8. Now, there's my reasoning for strength 8. We're hitting on 5s and critting on 5s. It is still better than your average, weapons battery, because we have extended the range to make this weapon more interesting. A 10 may be a little too much, so let's work with 8 instead. Arc will be front. Now, other things to consider. The prow weapons, are we using bombardment cannons, or are we going to be using torpedoes? Now, that's a really tough question. This vessel has been stated that it is meant to be good in both fleet actions and planetary assault. There has to be bombardment cannons here somewhere. I'm not... Yeah, because it's also a Space Marine vessel, and it's a good old-fashioned proper Space Marine vessel. Now, the newer rules did differentiate that the plasma destructor was on the keel. I do not accept the placement of it on the keel, because there's no way to disable it in critical damage. That's why it's prow. But the launch bays on the prow. I'm not happy with a prow placement of launch bays on an Imperial ship, but it is on a Space Marine ship, so we can do that. So why don't we have launch bay name? This can still be prow. Firepower is going to be 2. So now we have to ask ourselves, what about bombardment cannons? And what about weapons batteries? So this vessel is meant to be, do we make it so the bombardment cannons are in place of torpedoes? Or do we make it so the vessel can pick between torpedoes or bombardment cannons, which is standard for a Space Marine strike cruiser at this point? Now, this is a character ship. There's no reference whatsoever to this vessel being able to change its armament. But then again, there's really no reference to the vessel's armament beyond the original rules. And the original rules had torpedoes. Now, by giving this thing torpedoes on top of the Thunderhawk, we are giving it a significant boost in power. Remember, 1 reload ordnance reloads the torpedoes and the Thunderhawk. So we're making this effectively into a super dictator. So I'm always wary about this combination. So I got a mull on this. Let's put a pin in placement of those prow the dorsal bombardments of the prow torpedoes. And let's go to the weapons batteries. There is no reason why the weapons batteries on a Grand Cruiser are this weak, unless there was something else on those bays to supplement it. Even ships like the Exorcist have the launch bays to supplement its comparatively weak firepower. So 8, not good enough. Period. It's just not good enough. So I'm going to go... I will give it 45, because 45 is reasonably standard for all Grand Cruisers pretty much everywhere. There's only a couple have lower than 45 centimeter range. And the strength, I will go with 10. That's a pretty standard number for a Grand Cruiser. Oops. Port, weapons, batteries. 25 centimeter, strength 10. And 45 centimeter battery. Port. There we go. And strength 10. Now this is, again, a far more standard and versatile design for a Grand Cruiser. So that resolves the issue. Now, obviously, this looks like it is becoming something more akin to a repulsive. And that's really a question, something that we're going to be working on now, because we're going to come up here to the hits and armor values. Now, hits 10, that's going to stay the same. It's a Grand Cruiser. That's a standardized thing that's across BFG. The real question is, are we going to give it the 6-up armor that it is originally given or not? I am deeply against giving a Grand Cruiser with the amount of defenses that the original designs of the ship. I'm so against giving it 6-up armor all around. The only ships in the game that have 6-up armor all around in the battleship scale are the Battle Barge and the Necron Tomb ship. Everything else is 6-up prow armor. Cannot give it 6-up prow armor because we have a prow launch bay. Carriers don't get. No, actually, that's not true, because the Battle Barge has a 6-up prow armor and a prow launch bay and a prow torpedo bay, which is probably where the original design of the Nicor got their ideas from. So we can do that. There is actually convention. You know, I'm not against giving this thing 6-up armor in that case. Let's actually give it 6-up armor, because we're gonna be nice about this, but we're going to give it 3 shields. It is not getting 4 shields. It's not getting 5 shields. This is a super tanky, super tough ship. And it's meant to be effectively your flagship. It is more maneuverable than a battle barge, and it is actually not slightly less durable, which it should be. It is a Grand Cruiser, not a battleship. So this is acceptable. Speed, there is no way in hell a 6-up armor 10-hit cruiser is going to go 25 centimeters. Not without some massive negatives to its to the rules. It would have to have, you know, disruptive or dangerous or catastrophic failure in the engines if they're ever hit. So we could, if we wanted, do 6-up front armor, 4-up rear armor, making its engines particularly vulnerable to attack, and give you that 25 centimeter speed. That'd actually be pretty unique. You know what? Let's play the unique game here. Let's see if I can actually do this in this. There we go. 4 plus rear. Oh, that's lame. I'm gonna have to have this edited at some point. Oh, that's a shame. It should be able to permit this row to let me make something new. I hate it when people do this. Let me see if I can figure this out real quick. Can I edit the rules here? I don't know if I can change this. All right. Well, anyway, presume that that's 6-up front armor, 4-up rear armor, and we can increase the speed then 25. So that gives you a faster ship, but that also changes a number of other factors, because that makes the ship significantly more lethal on the frontal assault. So now we have to unfortunately come back to the dreaded question. Okay? Do we give this thing bombardment cannons or torpedoes? One version of the ship is trying to make it more like a... Both of these things are actually trying to make it like a battle barge, just in different ways. I'm going to actually go with the original rule set, and we're going to actually go with torpedoes. Torpedoes, strength is 6. Arc is front. Left. All around. Okay. So what do we have here? We have a significantly less tanky vessel with Now remember, this is 6 up front and side, 4 up rear. This vessel has a glaring weakness in its rear arc. Okay? Now, what do we have for weapons? We have a 45 centimeter plasma destructor, which is, instead of being locked at that 30 centimeters, you get that little extra range. And since this vessel actually doesn't have any bombardment cannons, we're going to increase that to 10. Make that a little bit better. So the plasma destructor is now a significantly more interesting weapon. Instead of being a shorter range, worse bombardment cannon, it is a longer range, roughly on par bombardment cannon. You have a little more flexibility in that range. It has its launch bay for Thunderhawks. It has the port weapons battery. Let's see, can I don't know if I can actually... I didn't make this set of cells, so please bear with me. But one way or another, getting back to the point, we have a more durable port and starboard weapons battery, which is in line with an actual barge. It's actually very similar to a battle barge. It's a little bit weaker on the port and starboard, which is fine. It's a Grand Cruiser. It has the prow torpedoes, making it really good on a frontal assault, but it doesn't overwhelm the prow. It gives the prow very similar. So basically, overall, this is just a lighter version of a battle barge, now that I think about it, which is a little bit silly considering I was trying to fix the ship and I suddenly kind of rolled myself into just a smaller version of the barge, which is it's actually really funny for me. The plasma destructor is now makes a lot more sense as a weapon. It's faster and it can keep up with a strike cruiser and a strike cruiser formation. It's still super tough at 6 up armor and 3 shields and 3 turrets and 10 hits. This is actually now when it comes to actual point cost, I would not have it 324, which is more expensive than the original but cheaper than the next one, because this thing's also going to have Space Marine crew. It's going to have all of the teleportation benefits. So my point cost for this, knowing that it's fast, knowing that it's really good in boarding, knowing that it's really good in teleport attacks, I'm going to put the price of this vessel presumptively at 375. Okay, now when it comes to the rules regarding its teleportation effects, I am taking everything here and throwing it in the dumpster. Screw that noise. There is no way at all the Carcharodons are better than the Grey Knights. I'm sorry, Carcharodons fans. You get your standard 2+ when it comes to boarding things. Now, the original rules for boarding. These are okay. I do not like the re-roll the dice on the boarding action, because that makes them as good as the Grey Knights, and I don't think that they deserve that. I'm sorry. What I would do, the rules that I would have for this, is you can re-roll your hit and run attacks. That's fine. You cannot do it with your Thunderhawks because you don't have the Teleportariums. I would say that if you succeed on a boarding action greater than on a dice roll differential that's greater than 2, greater than 2, you may select which critical hit happens on the ship. Or you can re-roll the critical hit roll when you roll for critical hits. Or even better, you can decide if you to have the boarding count as a draw. Now that a lot of people are going to sit there and go, well, why in the world would I want, after I just did a bunch of damage, why would I want it to count as a draw after I've done all the damage? Because that means instead of flying on, you are stuck on that ship and you are boarding it again until the enemy ship is dead, which is a tactical opportunity that the ability to choose is a remarkably good one. Okay? It's actually really important have that tactical opportunity. Because let's say I'm in a battle, I board an enemy ship that's really critical to my enemy. I board them, I win by 2. They take 2 points of damage. They're still operational. They're going to move on the next round and cause problems. But if I declare, instead of rolling for the critical hits, I declare it a quote unquote draw. We'd give it better wording. Basically, I do not continue on moving, and neither do they. We are still boarding one another. We are battling to the death. Having the option to make that choice is a very powerful one. Okay? And that's the way I would have this done, because that's the way that fits in better for me when it comes to the Carcharodons. Maybe you can call it like feeding frenzy. You know, whenever a Carcharodon's vessel boards an enemy ship and wins, they do not ever roll for critical. They both ships are locked in locked in a boarding action until every round until the one of the ships is destroyed. That is how I would handle it, because that also kind of describes the way that the Carcharodons work. Right? They are not the kind of person to give up on their prey, even if their prey may kill them. So, when it comes to points, I kind of sit this at 375. It may need adjustment with some kind of play, with a little bit of play testing, but this vessel definitely has its weaknesses. Just because it has 6-up armor all around doesn't mean that the enemies don't have answers to it. Lances exist. Lance artillery ships exist in this game. A squadron of firestorms will make this thing have a really, really hard time. So just remember, 6-up armor on a Grand Cruiser is super tanky, but it is not invincible. And, a Pulsar Lance, a couple of Pulsar Lances would absolutely obliterate this ship. So, that's my take on the Nicor, making the Nicor a significantly better vessel, a little bit more balanced, a little more interesting, and fit in a little more with the way that Battlefleet Gothic really was meant to be played. I can try to write up an official, or at least a fan-made data card with this, if I can figure out this Excel sheet a little bit better, and I'll try to post it in the homebrew section of the Discord channel. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all again in the next video.